My name is David McElnay. Hello and welcome. I am on the executive committee of the Urban Design Panel today, and I'm introducing our excellent panel presentation on earthquake-ready Burnside Bridge. The Urban Design Panel is sponsored jointly by the American Institute of Architects, the American Planning Association, and the American Society of Landscape Architects, and is composed of professionals from those three organizations with a shared interest in urban design. We are joined today by Heather Wilson, EVP CEO of AIA Oregon. The AIA has previously hosted this event at the Center for Architecture in Portland. Many of you will know that, and now generously offers this monthly Zoom meeting until further notice. In addition to a monthly email announcement, our panel presentations can be found on the AIA Oregon event calendar on the website, as well as their weekly Thursdays at 3 newsletter. Participation in any event makes you a panel member. We encourage you to sign up for information about future presentations. When you register for any UDP presentation, you will be included in the upcoming email invitations. We also encourage that you send any interesting future panel presentation ideas to Adrienne Morris at AIA Oregon, and her email. She's here today, and her email will be in the chat. Adrienne is hosting this video presentation, and we are recording it. So these presentations are recorded in Vimeo and are made available by the AIA as a Vimeo file, which can be found in the link provided in the chat box sometime after we get done today. So this presentation is going to be about 30 minutes and will be followed by a Q&A session. So please put your questions and points in the Zoom chat box, and our executive committee member, Brian Campbell, will be managing that chat function for this meeting, and will pose the questions to the presenters following the presentation. Follow-up questions can be sent directly to today's presenters. Should they care to include their emails, their email addresses, if that is possible, will be placed in the chat box for further contacts. So with that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to our presenters today, specifically Mike Pullen, who's spokesperson with the Multnomah County, and Steve Drahota with HDR, that's both a PM and works in the design function along with Mike. So Mike, Steve, please take it away.
Thank you, David. Hello, everyone from AIA. I see some familiar faces, and it's good to see Bob again. My wife was the AIA director for many years, and before she retired, so she sends her good wishes to you all. We also have with us two of our colleagues on the PBOT team, Portland Bureau of Transportation, Patrick Sweeney, who's our liaison at the city, and also Sharon Dalio, who works at PBOT with us on this project. And I see John Sarnicki, who's been following our project really closely, and we appreciate John's interest in the project. So we're here today to talk about things that are visual, which I know architects are interested in. We're also here to talk about ways we can save some money on this very expensive project. So I look forward to hearing your questions and comments. There's three big ideas for cost saving that we'll get into. So I'll do the first few slides, and then Steve will be taking over. Next slide, thank you. So why are we doing this project? We're doing this project because the Burnside Bridge is 95 years old. I think if the team that designed and built it were here today, they'd be shocked it's still in use. Bridges didn't last that long in the old days. There was at least one Burnside Bridge before the current one was built in the late or mid 20s. And as you all probably know, our region is very overdue for a very large earthquake. The last one, these are Cascadia subduction zone earthquakes. The last one was in the year 1700, nice round number. So it's 321 years ago. And that's before all of the stuff's been built in our region. And even the risk of this wasn't really known to the engineering community until around the 70s, I guess. And that's after most of our downtown bridges were built, including the Burnside. So this graph shows geologic time. If you look back 10,000 years of time is at the bottom of that image. The blue lines represent 9.0 Richter scale earthquakes, and the orange lines are 8.0. Steve Drahota and I are both from California. We've been in some pretty big earthquakes. None of them were even an 8.0, and they brought our cities to a standstill for some time. So this is going to be a really big earthquake when it happens. We don't know when, but if it happened today, engineers who know a lot about our bridges tell us that none of the bridges in the central city would be usable for weeks, months, and some of them would have to be completely rebuilt. So we're trying to get ready for the big one, and also have a bridge that will last another 100 years, even if the big one doesn't happen for 100 years. Next slide, please. So why did we choose the Burnside Bridge? This slide shows what are called regional lifeline routes that ODOT and Metro helped establish about 30 years ago. And they're mostly the freeways, the highways, and then there are also some key non-highway roads like Burnside. And Burnside is shown there on that yellow line. If you think about Burnside, the road, not just the bridge, it starts all the way in Gresham, and then it's one of the few roads that connects to a Willamette River Bridge that goes over the hills. So if you follow it west, you'll eventually get to Washington County, where it becomes Barnes Road. So lifeline roads are, typically really long roads that we can rely on in a big earthquake. This drawing or map shows seismically vulnerable things like overpasses or bridges themselves in red dots, and it shows more reliably built newer infrastructure in green dots like roads and bridges and over ramps. So luckily Burnside is a pretty resilient route. It's not a highway, but it's pretty wide for most of its length. And there's not many things that would fall down onto it. Like, the Morrison Bridge, when you get to the east side, you've got I-5 up above it that could fall and make the bridge unusable after a big earthquake. So as the county finished replacing our previously most structurally deficient bridge, the Selwood, we sort of pivoted to our 4 downtown bridges, and with the county commissioners' support, decided to take on Burnside because it's on a lifeline route and make it the next bridge that we can say is earthquake ready. Next slide, please. So 3 main purposes of the project. The day of the big earthquake, we want the Burnside Bridge to be usable that day when the shaking stops. So, some people ask, oh, what about the Tillicum crossing? And it's true that the Tillicum crossing, the bridge structure is built to be in use after a big earthquake. Unfortunately, the approaches to that bridge, TriMet needed to find some cost savings when they were funding the orange line, and they are expecting some settlement of the roads that approach the bridge, which are built on formerly kind of marshy land. So it might be weeks before the Tillicum is back in business after a big earthquake, and then it has freeway ramps above the max tracks as you get over to the west side around River Place. After that big earthquake, we want to have a bridge that can help our region recover and rebuild. And I oftentimes use the New Orleans comparison after Hurricane Katrina for this point. The region around New Orleans lost about 1/3 of its jobs, about 1/3 of its residents after Katrina. And I think it's just around now starting to get back to its former population. So we don't want to have that happen to Portland in our region. The last point there is sort of the one I mentioned earlier. If we're fortunate and the earthquake happens long after we're all dead and gone, which it could, we also want to make sure that we have a Burnside Bridge that is going to last another 100 years. The current bridge, even though we've done some maintenance on it in recent years, it's not going to last another 100 years on its own. So we think it's a prime candidate for a major investment. Next slide, please. So we've talked about why we want to do the project. Now we're getting to the meat of the presentation today. We are facing a funding challenge, and we're looking for cost savings, some of which are pretty dramatic, including the width of the bridge. But 2 things we're going to share with you today are generally pretty popular cost-saving ideas that I think aesthetically can make an attractive bridge. So Steve's going to be walking you through that. But why are we in this cash crunch, so to speak? One thing is that last November, we had a regional vote on a transportation bond that would have funded, among other things, the Southwest Corridor light rail line. Well, that failed. It probably wasn't the best time during a pandemic for that measure, but it had a lot of good things in it, including our project. Failure meant that we are not getting 150 million that we would have received had that passed. So that was a pretty good ding on our budget that we were looking forward to. Another thing is that there's a number of other large infrastructure projects in our region, and we're all competing for state and federal and regional funding. So that makes it a more competitive environment to try to close our budget gap, which is currently around 500 million. And then we have increasing, this is sort of our COVID spike situation, that third bullet there. We're seeing prices for labor and materials rise very quickly. The bridge construction wouldn't start for another 4 years. If we had to build it today, the prices are pretty shocking for steel and concrete. And we have a lot of architects here. You probably are very familiar with the COVID price spikes. Supply chains of all kinds of products are impacted. So we're hoping that that is not permanent, but we don't know. And we need to find money to help close the gap. So despite the challenges, the county is still committed to making sure we can have an earthquake-ready bridge in our central city. And today you'll be learning about some cost-saving refinements that we're getting public input on at this time. We haven't decided to do them yet, but we wanted to share them with you and hear what you guys think. Next slide, please. So our project timeline. Before this year, we thought we might be heading into construction in 2024. But what happened was earlier this year, after the failure of the bond measure and these new prices coming in from the COVID price spike, our county leaders said, you know, before we decide exactly what we're building and start to design it, let's take a pause here and see what we can do to bring down the cost while retaining the essential, most essential parts of the project. So it has delayed our schedule about 10 months to 12 months. We're now extending our planning phase to look at these cost-saving ideas. That's represented by that green bar. So we're now expecting to get approval from the federal government, maybe late summer, early fall next year, and then also hire the design firm next year, and then head into construction at 2025. That's if we can find the funding, which I'm optimistic. We've had some big funding challenges with other projects, and I think if we can maintain community support and enthusiasm for the project, I think we'll be able to fund it. So that's our goal. Next slide, please. So now we're going to introduce some of these refinements we've been mentioning, alluding to. And next slide. So we do have a preferred alternative. I haven't mentioned that yet. And the first question, this slide's kind of about how do you approach this cost-saving exercise? What are maybe the sacred cows, the things that are so essential we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, to add even another metaphor there. So the first thing that a lot of people ask is, well, do you have the right concept for making the bridge earthquake ready? We think we do, and it is called the long span replacement alternative. We went through a very rigorous get every idea on the table exercise and then winnow them down with different criteria. Then we went in a real deep dive with 4 alternatives, and this long span replacement bridge is considerably cheaper than the other alternatives that we've studied. So we don't think the problem is that, it's more about how big it is and the different elements of it. So we're sticking with that. That would actually add a lot of time and money if we reopen that whole debate, and we don't think we'd find a cheaper alternative. So next, we want to make sure that the purpose and need of the project is not damaged by the cost saving ideas we're looking at. So number one is we want to be able to say to the public that, yes, the day of the big earthquake, this bridge will still be usable. Now, it could be that police and fire departments say not everybody can use it that day. We're not sure how emergency responders will react. Hopefully everybody will be able to get home that day and crossing this bridge. But we want to be able, as the agency that is maintaining this bridge and in charge of creating it, we want to make sure that it is still standing from end to end, no settlement on the approaches, and that the bridge is usable. We want that bridge to be available for first responders and then to help us recover as a region afterwards. I kind of mentioned that earlier. And also we want it to meet our long-term transportation needs. And that's sort of a key factor that ties in with some of the cost saving things we'll be looking at. Different people might see what we're proposing in different ways. Finally, we want to make sure that as we look for cost savings, that the least powerful among us aren't having what's important to them be cut. And an example of that might be making sure that the bridge is accessible for people with disabilities. So we want to not sacrifice things like that. And if each of our county Willamette River bridges sort of has a personality based on where it is and who uses it. And I would say that the Burnside Bridge is probably used by more people who have disabilities than any of our other bridges. It's partly because there's so many social service agencies that are located near the west end of the bridge. So if you're out there, you notice a lot of people in wheelchairs on the bridge, and it's a pretty important connection for folks with disabilities. Next slide, please. So this slide has some small text. I know it's hard to read on the screen, but I'll kind of sum up. This slide is about the three main cost-saving ideas that we wanted to share with you today. The bottom two that have dollar figures, the 20 to 40 and the 25 to 35, those are for the structure types for the west end of the bridge that comes into downtown, as well as for the movable span. We have been asked, why are you building a bridge that we have to stop for so a ship can pass? We did look at one that would be high enough that ships could go underneath it, but we were told by the Coast Guard it would have to be so tall that you'd come down, you'd enter the bridge around 10th Avenue on either side, sort of like around Powell's Books. So Steve will be walking you through some of those issues on those two structure types. The big one above, these are cost savings projected from $140 to $165 million. That comes from narrowing the width of the bridge. If you think about it, it's pretty logical. You can't really make a bridge shorter in this case. It touches down at MLK on the east, 2nd Avenue on the west. Can't make it shorter, but you can make it narrower. And we were proposing a bridge that was considerably wider than what's out there today. I think around 26 feet wider, depends on where you take the measurement. So what's on the table now is a bridge that's about as wide as today's bridge, maybe 1 or 2 feet narrower. So Steve will walk you through some of the images of what that could look like. At the bottom, where it says TBD, to be determined, we're proposing that we wait until the construction firm that's going to build this bridge is on our team before we decide what the east span structure type will be. We have two remaining options, a cable supported or cable stay option and a tied arch option. That is such a technically challenging and such an expensive component that we would like to wait for additional input from the construction company. Remember, it spans I-5, the railroad, part of the river, and the East Bank Esplanade. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Steve to walk you through. He's got a lot of cool visuals to share with you on the top three items there.
Great. And thanks for having me back. I do get the privilege of showing all the pictures. So Mike did a great job of teeing me up. And I'm going to work from west to east as we go through the visuals. And when we get to the concepts, the massing models, just remember they are just that, concepts and massing models, to help frame up the kind of bridge types that we're talking about for decisions now versus what's going to be made in the future during final design, of which there's going to be a lot more emphasis put into the urban design and aesthetics with it. But with that, I'm going to jump right in and apologetically, I'm going to go fairly quickly so there's plenty of time for Q&A. So as context, this is our 3 bridges in one graphic. As a reminder, the west approach, 450 feet, ties into downtown. The main movable span, about the same length at 450 feet, which has to navigate or provide navigation for vessels. And then a longer 650 foot or more east approach span. And that's what Mike was talking about as being deferred till the final design phase. As we've been looking at structure types, we've been looking at this family of them. We actually started with more, but narrowed it down to this family. Tied arch, which is, again, classic arch shape, some modern versions on the right-hand side, a cable stay similar to Tillicum, different sort of style, and you can see the graphics of that. And then this girder option on the west approach. And we're going to start with the conversation about what that means and why. And it's particular to the west approach because you don't have the same clearance issues that you have on the east side. So as we move to the west approach, pretty classic picture that most people recognize if you're standing on the south side of the bridge looking to the north in Waterfront Park. And the structure type here is a girders type, built in 1926, fairly deep members for such short spans compared to today's standards, and a whole series of different columns in Waterfront Park. Well, the response that the project team has, and this was informed by the UDOG, the Urban Design and Aesthetics Working Group, is to replace the girder option with another girder option, thereby preserving the views up above, alignments with the historic district, while having a much longer span and actually gaining vertical clearance so that you can actually provide some opportunities for what could happen in and around the space below. So this massing model is that, we're showing some haunching into the girders, a lot more work, we'll get into it from an aesthetic standpoint, but the concept of a longer but shallower girder span that preserves the open feel of Waterfront Park, both below and above, is what is going to be progressing forward. And the good news is it saves between $20 and $40 million compared to some of the other above deck superstructure types. So it sort of checks all the boxes. When we talk about the movable span, lots of conversations about the movable span, different types, some modern versions of movable span. Left is the lift bridge and the right is the bascule bridge. You've seen different versions of lift and bascule if you just look up and down the river out there right now. But these are two modern versions of those styles. When you think about the existing condition, it is this bascule style, historic bascule style. And so as we were getting into the conversations with different massing models, we did these combinations of a girder option on the west side, a different, and we'll go through 4 different graphics of what the movable span could be. This again is the bascule option. There's nothing above the deck, so it's just a rotating movable span, and then coupled with a tight arch on the east side. So as we were looking at this, we said, okay, let's start with this conceptual rendering of the massing model. Then what if we were to place the bascule span with a lift span where it just raises vertically up? And you can see just in the massing model, the significance of the towers in the river. And those towers are sized appropriately. When you think about what has to be inside of them, it's all the mechanical, electrical equipment, plus the counterweight that fits inside of each one of these towers. So they're not small towers. And so then we said, okay, let's do the same assessment with the cable stay on the far east side. Again, girder on the west, bascule in the middle, cable stay with or without a different lifting structure. And again, here, from a compatibility standpoint, you at least start to get some similarities with the towers, but still pretty large masses in the middle of the river. And so as we approach this question, we continue to develop their views for the way this could look. And so we have a couple of different viewpoints with different graphics. This case, it's on the bridge itself. You can see big pink, obviously, to the west. So these series of views are going to be exactly like that. So if you were to be on the bridge with tight arch and cable supported with the bascule, you'll see very little above the deck. Whereas when you introduce the lift option, you start seeing the towers. As we move to a different place, and granted this view, unless you're sitting in the backseat of the car looking backwards, you're not necessarily going to have this view, but it's reminiscent of if you're on the East Bank Esplanade and looking in this direction as well. So looking north from the south side of the bridge, you would see now this combination of the tight arch with the bascule with a girder option compared to how that might look as you start introducing these vertical elements with the lift. And you can see the difference as you modify the long span on the east approach to something more like a cable stay. And I'll go back and forth to reference the difference between these two. Some definite differences in terms of the scale and how lightweight the superstructure looks, especially for the long span. Then when you start adding back in the lift option from the movable span, that mass is reintroduced. We then said, okay, let's get back on the bridge. In this case, you're standing on the west side looking east. This is a classic place where people, you can even see in the Google Earth, standing there to get a picture of the Portland, Oregon sign. And so this is a location that a lot of people will naturally move to. And then so when you start thinking about the different bridge options, again, bascule with the tight arch in the distance versus the tight arch and the lift, versus the bascule and the cable stay in the distance. Again, the towers get taller, but you don't have that same sort of massing on the outsides, versus the tight arch, the cable stay with the lift. So one of the things that we found clearly in all these graphics is the introduction of the lift movable span creates a mass that when we started asking this question to many groups, whether it's the Urban Design and Aesthetics Working Group, permitting agencies, the general public, it was pretty unanimous that, given all of the pros and cons, having a bascule option, that option that doesn't have anything above the deck, made the most sense. From a cost standpoint, it also cost between $25 and $35 million less. So moving forward with this bascule movable bridge in combination with something on the east side to be determined in the final design phase. And this goes back to Mike's point of the complexities and challenges with building, whether it's a tight arch or a cable stay, over the freeway, over the railroad, over the East Bank Esplanade, over the river, is really something that before the county commits to one type or another, wants to get contractor input. The actual contractors would build the bridge. And so these two options are both being deferred into the final design phase for the ultimate selection, which is expected to happen sometime in early 2023. So moving into bridge width, this is where Mike mentioned the granddaddy of all the cost savings really is about the width of the bridge. Hard, just like to his point, hard to reduce the bridge length without a lot of problems. So the cost savings comes in how do you assess space and how do you create space on the bridge itself. So this series of cascading cross sections is a comparison of the existing cross section that's out there today, the original DEIS cross section that if money was no object would be the option going forward. Unfortunately, money is an object, and therefore this refined cross section was assessed to lead to what's coming out as the updated preferred alternative with a narrower cross section. And so in comparison, this narrower cross section reduces the bike ped space from just over 20 feet to somewhere between 14 and 17 feet, which the lower bound of that bike ped space in each direction is the Tillicum width at 14, could be upwards of 17, but that has a direct effect on what the roadway width inside could be. And so there's some variable dimensions to the roadway width as well that responds to an affordable bridge cross section. And so the best way to show that is really this graphic that shows that with a 14-foot space on the outsides, you could have up to a 50-foot space for roadway width. If you allocated 17 feet to the outsides, the roadway width inside could be reduced down to 44 feet. And there's different impacts to what that could mean to shoulders primarily, and maybe the bridge lane dimensions themselves. In all cases, for the roadway width, it was a reduction from 5 lanes down to 4. And so as we asked ourselves, what can you do with 4 lanes? This is where we start to get to a lot of cross sections. There are really 4 different options on how to handle traffic within the 4 lanes. And that's what this graphic is really intended to show. And the trick to this graphic is look at the colored arrows. Everything else is details, but if you look at the colored arrows, you'll notice the difference between the traffic lane configuration. So number 1 is 2 westbound lanes, 1 eastbound lane, and a bus only lane. So anytime you see in these graphics, the red rose lane, coloring up the rose lane color, you'll see a dedicated bus only lane. Number 2 is swap it so that there's only 1 permanent westbound lane, 2 permanent eastbound lanes, and the bus only. Number 3 is really the option of a reversible lane. So at peak times in the morning, you would have 2 westbound lanes shown by the 2 arrows in orange. At peak times at the evening, and frankly, the rest of the day, you would have 2 dedicated eastbound lanes and then the bus lane going eastbound as well. And so that's a response to when you have the most vehicles crossing the bridge. and how best can you accommodate the lanes to match a bridge width that's fixed. Number 4 itself, while it looks great on this cross section, 2 lanes in each direction, really the problem with it comes at the ends of the bridge. There's an assumption that you would have a bus queue jump, so basically a short bus only lane at the very ends of the bridge that buses could sneak into and get around all the queued traffic at the intersections at the ends. Unfortunately, you'd have to have really quite a long bus queue jump lane to the point where it's actually reducing the benefit of the narrower bridge length, the cost savings that we're going for. So from a cost standpoint, that reversible lane is something that's very intriguing. It maximizes the use of space and ties it to the traffic when you need it. So we're studying based on other projects, what lessons learned have we seen? This is a graphic of a reversible lane on a bridge in Vancouver, BC. So how does it perform? What are the key entry treatments to make sure it's safe as people get onto the bridge? And how do you make sure that traffic operations and safety are maintained? That's really a function of these lights. I don't know if you can see them very well in this picture, but there's a little green, a little red X, a little red X. Tells you as you're moving one direction, which lane you should be in versus the lanes that are closed with the red X's. So we're also studying what would it mean to have more overhead signage and even possibly gates to help direct people in the right lane before you ever get onto the bridge itself. So lots of work is going into the study of this reversible lane, which really doesn't exist in Oregon. It happens in other states like Washington, California, but we don't have a prime example of that here. So with that, apologize about going so fast, but I want to hand it over to Mike for the last couple of slides before we take questions.
Thank you, Steve, and thanks for covering that so quickly. I'll try to go quickly. Just have a couple more slides. Today, we're actually launching an online open house to get input on the same things we're sharing with you today. That's at burnsidebridge.org. And there's a link there to our online open house and a video that kind of with motion shows what Steve's been sharing. So we've got that happening for the next month, doing a lot of these briefings like today, doing a webinar in early December. We have information on that on the website too. If people want to spend more time with us and ask us questions at that setting, that's coming up on a weeknight in early December. Sending out our news release and e-newsletter and social media posts today. We also work a lot with our non-English speaking communities and other minority communities with a team we call the Community Engagement Liaisons. Next slide, please. So this is sort of where we're headed next. We're doing this round of outreach on these cost-saving ideas. And then in January, we'll gather our community task force, which is a group of 20 citizens that provide input for us. And we have had input from another group that Steve mentioned called the Urban Design and Aesthetics Working Group that includes, I think, about 5 architects, including Bob Hastings, Patty Tillett, Carol Mayer Reed, Brian Kimura. So you might recognize some of those names. Anyway, they've weighed in also on some of these items. And that task force will recommend which cost-saving ideas they think we should explore or adopt. There's a group called the Policy Group that will be also weighing in probably in March, and our our Board of County Commissioners. The Policy Group is a group of regional elected and appointed leaders. Then this spring, we hope to publish our supplemental draft environmental impact statement, and that'll have a 45-day comment period. And we're hoping to kind of complete this planning phase of the project late summer, early fall next year. And that would require getting our record of decision and publishing our final environmental impact statement for federal highway approval. And then we can start to get out the pencils and really design this new bridge. I think that's our last slide. So happy to take questions from the group. And I guess David's going to facilitate.
Well, actually, I'm going to facilitate, Mike.
Okay, thanks.
This is Brian Campbell, member of the Urban Design Panel Executive Committee, representing the American Planning Association, actually. Excuse me. David actually did have a question about the what is the width of the current existing sidewalks, just for comparisons purposes.
I guess I'll take that. Yeah, that's shown in this top drawing here. There's a sidewalk and then an adjacent bike lane that's at the same level as the traffic. And if you add those, you get 12 feet, 8 inches And as Steve mentioned, the narrowest that we're proposing for the new bridge would be 14 feet on each side, which is what the Tillicum has. But we're also saying, depending on how much width you give the traffic lanes, that width could go up to 17 feet on each side.
Okay, now while we're waiting for some other questions to emerge, I want to give Patrick an opportunity to say a few things. I know he's a partner on your project team, but the city, I think, kind of would like to make some comments here as well while everybody else is getting ready to ask questions, if there are any. So, Patrick, are you there?
Yeah. Hey, thank you, Brian. So yeah, well, thanks everyone for taking the time during your lunch break. This is a really important project, not only for the city and the county, but also for the region. You know, no joke about the importance of the lifeline route and having a bridge that's going to stand up across the river, because as Steve and Mike mentioned, it'll be probably the only one standing. If all goes well, usable very quickly or immediately after the earthquake. So that's really important. So, but you know, there's a lot of details that the city and the county are agreeing on, and then some things we're still working it out. So with these cross sections, just real quick, the city put forth a concept for keeping the travel lanes narrow to optimize the width of the bike ped. So it would put them at 17 feet wide, and that would be an 8-foot sidewalk with a 1-foot yellow tactile strip, and then 8 feet for bikes. That would be on both sides. And we think that could work really well. We see the Burnside Bridge as becoming, you know, with the new design and with that crash-worthy barrier, a facility that will attract a lot of new riders. In addition to consider the Blumenauer Bridge, which is, I'm sure many of you seen it, over 84. That connection will be done soon. So there's going to be new patterns that are going to be emerging, and that people will be using the Burnside Bridge for their active transportation connections. There's some key details on the east and west sides with how bikes and peds connect to the bridge, and not just from the ends, like from 2nd Street or from MLK. It could be off on the east side, it's from the East Bank Esplanade. And there are different concepts being considered. One is a public elevator connection to the East Bank Esplanade. The city does not favor public elevator in that location at all. We prefer some kind of a ramp. What that exactly looks like to be determined, but we definitely prefer a universal access, more reliable, we think safer ramp facility that connects to the East Bank Esplanade. And it's such a key connection and such an important urban design gesture in this grand move in rethinking about this key connection across the river right in the heart of the central city. So on the west side, you know, the connection to the Skidmore Old Town Max Station, there's a lot to unpack there, and there's also quite a few things up in the air. There's one westbound bus stop right near the U of O building. There is consideration of that bus stop potentially moving to 2nd Avenue, and that's something that we are in discussions with TriMet, and TriMet is mulling that over. If that occurs, then the idea of public elevators connecting down to the Skidmore Old Town Max Station, we definitely want to reconsider that and think about the preferred ADA access route would be using the sidewalks that go around the block to Cooch Street and then to Ankeny, if the bus stops are all at the intersection of Burnside and 2nd. So those are, you know, the city of Portland places a high priority, the highest priority on bikes, pedestrians, transit, with pedestrians first and followed by bikes second. As you know, these are the priorities that we look at moving into the future. And these are the trips that we want to increase. And these are the options that we want to make easier so more people will choose them and they're more comfortable and more convenient. So really important details. We're still working them out. We love this project. We like working with the county, but we're still working out these really important details. Thank you, Brian. Oh, Brian, you're on mute.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. Oh, Patrick. So I've just been reading through the questions, and there are a lot of questions about the various aspects of the pedestrian bike design here. And one of the questions that I think needs to be discussed is one that Sean brought up about the anticipated design speed for autos on the bridge. And he remarks that a 25-mile-an-hour design speed, if you think about a curb instead of a barrier considered to give more space to ped and bikes, makes the overall section more flexible for use after an earthquake. That's one idea. And I don't know, maybe we should give a chance for Steve and Mike to kind of respond to just that design speed. And the related question perhaps is the bus lane possibly reversible? That came up in another question or two. So why don't we respond to those first, and then I'll jump in with some more.
Steve, I'll start with the little history of the crash-worthy barrier, and then I think I'll hand it off to you on design speed and the Rose Lane. So it's about 6 years ago, a driver lost control on the Burnside Bridge and drove up on the sidewalk and struck and killed a pedestrian. And ever since then, the county has had requests from bicycle and pedestrian advocates to install a crash-worthy barrier. A lot of the advocates wanted us to do it and maybe get rid of a traffic lane when we did the maintenance project on the bridge a few years ago. County leaders said that when we replace the bridge, we will commit to doing a crash-worthy barrier. We acknowledge that it takes up some precious width. We acknowledge that it costs money, that when we're trying to save money, and it is a safety commitment that our county leaders have decided they're not going to give in on. We've made this commitment to groups like the Street Trust and Bike Loud. Design speed is one thing, and then there's human behavior. And we've been told that this bridge just doesn't feel safe to bicyclists in the traffic lane. It was 35, it's now 30. And I think Steve's gonna tell you that when we replace it, the posted speed will be even lower. So I'll hand it off to Steve.
That's exactly right. So 25 is by intention less than today, or at least less than at the moment. And that commitment to a crash-worthy barrier, we reduced that width down to a foot and the special design in order to have a minimum width to go to that. The other question it sounded like was this question about the directionality of the bus-only bridge. And it ties back to the number of lanes. So with only 4 lanes and the existing eastbound bus-only lane, based on feedback from TriMet, the importance of maintaining that eastbound bus-only lane is exactly that, vital. So that becomes one of the requirements. In looking at a westbound bus-only lane with only 4 lanes, it comes with a compromise. It comes with either eliminating a westbound movement or only having one eastbound movement in which the volumes are the maximum. So this concept is only showing with 4 lanes, this eastbound bus only lane, because of that reason. There's also some other complications with how do you approach the bridge itself in the westbound direction with the bus only lane. That can probably be solved over time through different projects with the city. But that's one of the byproducts of having the narrower 4 lane is the likely inability to have a westbound bus only.
Okay. Quite a few questions here. They're piling up. But I think while we're still on the subject of pedestrian facilities and how they would perhaps integrate with pedestrian facilities on either end, and Patrick mentioned they were opposed to an elevator option. I'd like to hear a little bit more about the connections on each end and how they would play out there. So.
Thanks, Brian. I'll take that one. So I think Patrick did a good job summarizing the west end of the bridge. So the west end of the bridge, there's currently county-owned stairs from the bridge down to the MAX station from both the north and south sides of the bridge. And as Patrick said, there's one bus stop on the bridge, and it's westbound, and it's basically above the MAX station, like around First Avenue. So if the bus stop moves off the bridge, I think, as Patrick said, there's a high likelihood that the stairs could go away, and the elevator and any ramp. We also looked at ramps at the west end. All those might go away if there's no bus stop on the bridge, because it's primarily there to help people, get from the bus stop down to the MAX station. At the same time, TriMet's also talked about closing that MAX station to increase the speed through MAX through downtown. So if the MAX station closes down, I think that the stairs become even less necessary there. I know that connectivity is a great goal, and we've had input from a lot of people on this stuff. But so sidewalk improvements around the block from Second down to Ankeny and Cooch, that seems to be a minimum that we're going to do to make it more ADA compliant compared to today. So that leaves the east side, where the ramp is favored by lots of advocates, including the city. And it is by far the more expensive option, even when you factor in the maintenance and the elevator breakdowns. The elevator and stairs is just so compact compared to the ramp. So the county has said it will fund a ADA compliant connection from the bridge down to the Esplanade. And I think the path forward is quite likely to be a ramp that we find outside funding for, because there is shrinking number of supporters for the stair and elevator concept, but the ramp is more expensive, and we'll need to find funding. The current connection is city-owned, the Esplanade is city-owned, so it's possibly a collaboration with the city, or maybe even other funding partners. It might be something that a federal grant could help fund also.
Okay, question here about the future of the streetcar and what kind of influences that's going to have on design for the project, if any.
I'll take the first part, and then I think I'll kick it over to Patrick because that's part of a city master plan. So the project is committed to making the bridge streetcar ready, which in essence is about making the deck thick enough so that you can install rails either when the project is built or at a future date. And that's what we did with the Selwood Bridge in return for the city making a really large financial contribution to that project. And then Patrick might be the better one to comment about the likelihood of streetcar or the status of it.
Yeah, that's that's a look into my crystal ball and see if the city would prioritize that kind of a streetcar alignment. I'm not really sure. I think my crystal ball would say that a potential BRT alignment might be more likely. Possibly, thinking about the conversion of one of the 3 bus lines that use the Burnside Bridge. That could more likely, one of those could be converted into a BRT facility or BRT corridor before there would be a streetcar going across. However, not to rule out any possibilities by future transportation planners, it could make sense to have streetcar going across in a different kind of streetcar network than what we currently assume. So so the bridge will be built to be streetcar ready, and much the way I think that the Selwood Bridge was designed, where that lane, the concrete in that lane can be lifted out and the tracks put in. So there's definitely some engineering that goes on so that when the rails go in, they attach to something solid. So it's well supported. Just want to say one other thing, going back to the public elevators and the costs and the maintenance and the ramp. Mike is right. The ramps are more expensive. However, the maintenance costs are practically zero when compared to an elevator. Elevators, we have elevators all over the city. We have the Darlene Hooley elevator in South Waterfront that goes over I-5. We have the new Gideon elevators at Bob Stacy Crossing over the Orange Line near Southeast 14th and Clinton. They are closed frequently due to vandalism and just heavy use. They often leave a lot of people stranded. So you know, I think the costs of what is proposed for the elevators, I think they're low. The city thinks that those cost estimates are low, although we need more information. We don't know enough about the maintenance estimates, you know, so we'd like to learn more about that when the time comes. But point is, yeah, a ramp will be a little more expensive to get implemented because it's a different kind of footprint. However, a ramp is always open. A ramp is more of a full-time ADA solution, and given how frequently public elevators are closed, they would be a part-time ADA solution. So, you know, we favor a full-time universal access for people to use when they want to use it and not be inconvenienced with, you know, frequent elevator closures from vandalism and maintenance problems.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Couple of questions about just the long-term configuration of Burnside on either end. I assume that's a city more than a county issue, but I guess we're assuming that the couplet on the east side remains with Cooch. Any other thoughts about changes that might occur there that would affect the design of the bridge?
Patrick, that might be a good one for you.
Yeah, I think so.
Right now, I know of no plans to change the Burnside Cooch couplet. There are plans underway to improve transit operations and reliability on Cooch to get to the bridge. There are transit priority, a project going that's, I don't know all the details on it because it's not my project, but I know it's in the works, and that will help improve the transit travel times through the Cooch corridor, because as many of you know, during the AM or PM peaks, it tends to get hung up in the traffic queues along Cooch to get to the bridge. So the improvements, that project, when that gets implemented, if I'm not mistaken, it's going to be done in 2022. Sharon Dalio is on the call, my engineering colleague here at PBOT. Sharon, do I have it right on the implementation for the Cooch project?
Yep, it's next summer.
Next summer.
And it would transition. It's from 14th to 7th.
Okay, there you go. That's going to be a new transit priority project on Cooch to help the buses get through those AM and PM peaks.
Okay, let's shift over to a question from Sean about, with the West Side girder option kind of set, what are the opportunities there for to more fully express and integrate the existing park use below, Saturday Market, et cetera, into the design development of the bridge so that it's more than just a space below? And I think the same thing can be said about any other thoughts about the east side as well, where we have a skate park and some other things going on down there. So any ideas there?
Okay, yeah, I'll start, right, and Steve might have additional comments. So whoever asked the question's right. You know, Saturday Market is a beloved local long-term cultural institution that sets up most Saturdays and Sundays of the year underneath the bridge. Their director is happy with this solution, which gives them a little bit more headroom. And while somebody noted that the columns are bigger, those are important for making sure the bridge is usable after the earthquake. And there's a lot fewer columns in this picture than the earlier one that Steve showed that shows the current bridge, which has really a forest of skinny columns underneath the bridge. So yeah, there you have it. So Saturday Market's the main event that uses that space. We have the Japanese Historic Plaza, Memorial Plaza to the north. That will be impacted during construction, but will, and it's not the columns, it's more just a little bit of the landscape mound work would be part of our work zone. And we'd make sure that that's in good shape when we finish the project. And basically, I think you'd have a more open view of the river and the east side when you're walking underneath the bridge there. At the east end, someone mentioned Burnside Skate Park. They have a board of directors, believe it or not, and they have a representative on our task force. We've worked closely with them, and they actually have sort of the standing of a National Register of Historic Places structure, because they were really one of the first do-it-yourself constructed skate parks in the US. And if we do this long span, which we're planning to do, this bridge type, it'll require a closure of the park during some phases of construction, but the park will be able to remain in largely its current form, minus the top of the old bridge.
Okay, we have, I think, time for at least one more question. There's a question here about the National Historic Landmark status and the presumed delisting of the bridge and how that timeline works with the mitigation process long-term.
Steve, do you want to take this one?
So during this, NEPA process, the environmental permitting process, there's been lots of coordination with NPS, National Park Service, about the bridge and the bridge options. So first on the west side, and really their jurisdiction applies to the historic district and the impacts of the bridge to the historic district. So they gave us two different statements, one formal statement about the graphic that's shown here on the west side. Basically, anything above the deck creates an adverse effect. And therefore, from a bridge type standpoint, this open view girder style is something that is really the style that is most compatible from a National Park Service standpoint. The movable span itself, they didn't go so far to say it's an adverse effect, but they did say they strongly recommend going with that bascule style for a lot of the same reasons in its proximity to the historic district. So that work is going to be coming out as part of our supplemental DEIS, and the public will have the opportunity to see how exactly those conversations have gone.
Okay, we're about out of time.
Hey, Brian,
yeah.
and also I just wanted to jump in really fast. This is David. I have a hard stop here, and a lot of people do at one, and I'm going to have to jump off. I'm going to let you sort of lead us out here, Brian. Any last thoughts? But I had just thrown in one question about where we are in the timeline. So you talked about a design build process, and I guess all of us are wondering, well, how much design is left in your process? So can you give us, a 15-second sense of like, hey man, is it those round columns with those square beams, or is there design left here?
There's a ton of design left. It starts in 2022 after we finish this phase and hire the design firm.
Okay, and would you just very quickly say that you don't do or do not anticipate design build approach to hitting a gross maximum price as driving the boat versus aesthetics, or is that aesthetics and connectivity to the cityscape will play a role in balancing the cost decisions?
It won't be design build. It's likely going to be construction manager, general contractor, or CMGC. And we know that aesthetics are very important. It's the heart of the city. The Burnside Bridge and the Willamette River are the center of our grid city and regional grid, streetscape. So we're going to pay attention to aesthetics.
Yeah, and so what I would say on behalf of my colleagues on the executive committee and everybody that threw something in the chat, I think everyone would really appreciate if you could take a look at some of those chat points, or if we would have the ability to follow up via email with you with those points. Michael, are you the point person?
Yeah, thank you. Because I have to admit, I haven't been able to keep up with the chat. So if somebody could send me or Cassie the chat, and we can work with our colleagues at the city of Portland and get back to you with answers.
I think our committee can talk with Adrian to see just how we collect those up, and maybe we just send you a series of bullets from one of us, something like that. We'll get to the bottom of it.
Thank you.
Brian, unless there's any other super burning item here, I think
Yeah,
Alright.
I don't think so. You know, a lot of the remaining questions are more kind of nuanced versions of pedestrian, you know, versus, you know, widths there and versus other things. And the
Yeah.
streetcar, maybe, can you run it in, or can you run the bus only lane in the middle and have it reversible? So I think those are things that maybe
Yeah.
you could kind of address
Yeah.
a little
So-
later on here. So
And I would say, to be fair to the team that's bringing this thing down the pipeline, is that, you know, right now you're talking about sort of how do we connect to the side of the bridge or something like that. I threw a point in very quickly saying, you know, what if you reconsider, and I mean to seriously think about this as you walk around for the next few months, that the pedestrian connections, the bike connections to the bridge from the cityscape around it have a status at the scale of the bridge, right? That they're not these little hook-ons that come along sort of like the legs on an ant after the fact, right? And I think that there's cost associated with those kinds of things, but it's also a philosophical and physical gesture in terms of, you know, the Esplanade is a fantastic thing, you know, Riverside Park is a fantastic thing. So those gestures matter. Just leave you with a thought there.
more of an integrated design. You're talking about integrated into the real conceptual design.
Well,
of the bridge.
Integrating the design and gesturing at the size of the cars and trucks that are driving over it. When I'm walking around the cityscape, it's like, how do I get on that bridge? And if I'm down on the Esplanade, oh, look, it's that tower, right? There's something wayfinding and landmark quality that could perhaps solve the problem of the fact that these bridges are scooting over, you know, 4 and 8 blocks of city. So anywho, that was just my thought there. But we really appreciate, you know, everything today. Brian, thanks for curating that stuff. And all of a sudden the questions came rolling in. Obviously we could do another hour here
Yeah.
and have lots of, we could needle you with deeper questions and get a lot of great information that we got today. So thanks so much.
Brian, if I may, I'd like to take 30 seconds. I think that it's important to remember that the bridge itself is a National Historic Landmark. And it's not just the way it approaches the Old Town Historic District. The bridge itself is National Historic Landmark, and it will have to be delisted. And there's a process by which that happens, and there's a mitigation process which that happens, and that needs to work in relationship to the overall process of the bridge design and construction. And I think it's important to let us know what that process is and what the timing is. That's the one thing. And I guess the other thing is just remember that it's an National Historic Landmark, and it just is. It's proven to be valuable culturally for the last 80 years.
And we could come back with a presentation on the mitigation plan, which is still to be developed. Yeah.
Yeah, that was going to
thank
be
you.
my last point, is that we would all be excited if you could return again at a point where we don't feel like the water has gone under the bridge, so to speak, but rather that all of this community can play an important part. And I will reiterate, you've got the American Society of Landscape Architects, the American Institute of Architects, and the American Planning Association. That's what this group is composed of. So it doesn't exist within each one of those groups. This is unique to Portland, unique to that sort of triumvirate of potential brainstorming. So we appreciate everything today. And we will look forward to finding a good slot when you all can come back and make that presentation again. So I hate to cut it off, but I got to run. Everybody's got to run.
I think we should be closing it down. Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Thank you.